And for our next session, we have Isabel Thompson, the head of product of Molecule, with Reka.eth of guild.xyz and Lily Hansen Gillis of UX Core and LabDAO. Their session is called Product Discovery, User Research, DAO Onboarding, and Other Use Cases. Ladies?
So we'll just do an all-together intro of what the whole thing is going to be, and then we each have a little session about our topics, and then we'll do a little bit less messy of a breakout session, but we'll do 3 groups around those topics. And yeah, Isabel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Isabel Thompson. I'm head of product here at Molecule. Started about a month ago, but I was at the Blockchain for Science conference back in 2018. And it's extremely invigorating and exciting to see how the energy has changed in the space in those last 4 years.
Yeah, so I'm Reka.eth, the guild.xyz founder. I'll be talking more about a little bit more technical and practical DAO tooling, onboarding flow, what is out there right now, what might be useful for you guys, and stuff like that. I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Lily. I do UX and community at LabDAO, and yeah, excited to be here.
Hi, welcome everyone. I know it's the end of the afternoon. There's already been a lot of information that people have had to absorb, but I don't think there's anything like being part of a movement that has the potential to change the world to, get your energy going again. First, I have a question for you. How many people have heard of decentralized science, just say in the last month? How many people here are super new? Wow, okay, that's cool, that's cool. How many in the last, say, 6 months? Okay, we're starting to see pushing a majority now. And how many people less than a year, but more than 6 months? And how many people more than a year? Okay, so I think we can see that even here amongst a space of enthusiastic early adopters, there's still a lot of people who are really, really new. In the spirit of Agile, we've changed our topic today to make it particularly relevant to something that we think is important, which is spreading this message and snowballing the decentralized science movement into its next stage, which requires us reaching out to a lot more people. We're in a new space, an incredibly new space, which means, by definition, almost everyone that we want to be a part of this space has not yet heard of this space and definitely isn't in this space. Over the last couple of months before I joined Molecule, I did my, some very, very basic user research, talking to a few different people who I think belong in the decentralized science movement. Researchers, biotech founders, other stakeholders in science. Not a single one of them knew what Web3 was. Repeat that. Not a single one of them knew what Web3 was. A bunch of them had heard of crypto, of course, probably hard to miss that. But this new rebranding of crypto that's happened in the last year, they weren't aware of this. And this included some people who are absolutely the type of people we see as being in this space long term. So, for example, one was a ex-PhD from Cambridge who had started his own biotech firm and actually raised millions in capital for a potentially extremely exciting, innovative therapeutic. Very tech-savvy, been trading biotech stock for years. Never heard of it. And I think it shows how much we take for granted. As soon as you start spending time with people around this space, it becomes more and more of your life. Probably a number of us have found that out. And it can be easy to forget that a lot of people are not at all living and breathing the world that we are in. When it comes to NFTs, of course, I asked about those as well. Most people had heard of NFTs, but of course, if they thought of them at all, they thought of them as extremely expensive JPEGs and told me that they couldn't see the point. So cue a long discussion for me on what IP NFTs were. Okay, so we know this, at least in the back of our mind. I think we know that people don't have the same level of awareness as us. We are the early adopters here in this room. We are almost by definition not representative, and that's putting aside the things that we might like to see in terms of representation from a wider variety of gender, race, socioeconomic background, geography. But we are not representative. We are, I would say, very curious people, speaking as a large brushstroke. We may be more risk tolerant. We're certainly out there exploring different ways of doing science, which a lot of scientists don't have time to do, even if they are interested. So if we want to see decentralized science snowball into the movement that it can be, then step one is probably building a much, much greater awareness. We know that things like vocabulary are a significant barrier to people becoming more involved, and that's just one of the topics that we'll be diving into later. So this session, we're going to take you on a very extremely speedy path for the things that is required if you want to get your DeSci project to a greater set of users. The first part is going to be some feedback from us and some even a live demonstration of a user interview. So let's see how that goes. So if you want to reach more people, then step one is you've got to understand your users, and that means putting aside preconceptions, assumptions, and you mustn't map on your own mentality onto the people that you want to use your project, because they almost certainly are different from you. So one is understand your users. Two is then use that to build greater awareness, and that's what Lily will be covering. Three is about onboarding, and Reka is going to cover onboarding, planning and onboarding and scaling your workflow. And then four is inclusivity, and we want to make that a bit of a theme that runs throughout these different subject areas, to think about how we can make the space seem inviting as we do all of the above activities. So to cover the workshop streams, first up is demystifying Web3. So it's about, as Tyler said earlier, are there better ways that we can explain what we're doing here? Can we explain the value in a more compelling way? Can we avoid some of the terminology that makes people feel that this space isn't for them? Two is building awareness, so making the space more inviting. And three is the looking at your onboarding flow and tool discovery, planning and scaling your onboarding. Oops, there's my pen. Oh no, could you go back a slide? It's here. Do you want it actually? Oh, could you go back? Yeah, we don't want this yet. Great. Do you guys want to say anything before we dig into our interview? All right. So we're going to try something here that is should be fun anyway. I have managed to find a willing and brave scientist who has Toby from the Max Planck Institute, who has been willing to come and do a mini live user interview. So, woo! Cheers for Toby! And just so you know, this is why you should never just say hello to people in the entrance hall, because he was like, hey, I'm Toby, and now he's up on stage. So let that be a lesson to you. So this isn't a typical user interview. This isn't really a product user interview. But what I'm going to do here is just ask a few questions about Toby's personal experience so that I understand his route into the decentralized science space. Yeah, I'll give you my broader interview tips at the end, actually. Okay. I'm standing up, which makes it seem a lot more formal. Sorry about the power dynamic. Never do this. Actually, can I grab that seat? That would be great. All right, I'll sit next to you. There we go, musical chairs. Hey, Toby.
Hi.
Great to meet you.
Oh, thanks. Meet you too. Nice to meet you.
I believe you are a scientist at the Max Planck Institute, right? Could you tell me what you're researching?
Yeah, more or less. I'm not really researching, actually. I used to build instruments for taking pictures from aircraft, from the atmosphere. And now I'm trying to catch the data of all my colleagues because we had this big field campaign, and yeah, people captured a lot of data, and it's now like stored on their disks, on their USB drives or whatever, and we want to have access to them all.
All right, I'll ask you a little bit more about that in a moment. First, could you tell me, how did you end up here at the Decentralized Science Conference today?
Wes told me. So
tell us who Wes is, for people who don't know.
Wes is a guy from Protocol Labs, I guess, and he's working on the Bacalhau project, which should bring computation to the data, because we often deal with like large data sets, and it's often easier to move the code to the data than the other way around.
And when did you hear about it?
The conference?
Yeah.
Wednesday.
So you heard about it last Wednesday,
Yes.
and you're now here today. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Nice. What did Wes say to you that made you want to come?
He said he's here, and I said nice.
I can't promise that every question will yield an answer that you can use for your onboarding.
And also, I checked the website, and I saw that like there's some effort in replacing journals by scripts, and I found that interesting as well.
So, did the term decentralized science mean anything to you at the time, or was it more just based on what Wes said to you?
I had heard about similar things like quite a long time ago, and so I had some idea about that, but nothing really specific. So I kind of just had in mind that one idea was that it doesn't make too much sense to pay like journals so much money for what they are doing, and kind of understood that idea. So I thought maybe it has something to do with that.
So it was more from the publishing angle and sort of data assets that you sort of associated the movement with at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, my personal problem is more about the data we are collecting, but yes, this publishing angle I had in mind as well, yeah.
So what is it about the data angle that interests you?
Well, this field effort we had is like a huge field campaign in our surrounding, basically. So we have been east of Barbados. We have had a couple of aircraft, couple of ships, and so we wanted to capture the state of the atmosphere and the ocean in its entirety as much as we can. And the project like grew because we started out with a little project in mind, and then like more and more scientists came and collaborated on that, and all of them took their data, and now we like moved apart again, and everyone has their own data, and it's a little bit hard to share that due to like many reasons, like servers don't work, and you cannot decide on which continent you want to host the server, and so on and so forth. And that's what made me more curious about having like a decentralized system, which we kind of have today. I mean, everyone has the data on their USB drives, but it's not usable because I cannot actually get the data. So it's stored, but not available. And this availability problem brought me into this, basically.
So what are you using to coordinate this data at the moment?
Well, we tried to have like the one centralized project repository where everyone is supposed to upload their data to, and then like there were problems. For example, data was too big for the repository, so they couldn't accept it, and then there were like political reasons, like we only store our data on our country's server and not on their country's server, and many things of these kinds. And then another problem was data changed, even though the servers promised not to change it. And all of these kinds of difficulties we had, and that's basically it.
So if anyone here is building data storage and coordination tools, then they should definitely reach out to Toby. If I were building something like that myself, I would start to dig in more about the tools he's currently using, the problem, how he's trying to solve the problem at the moment, what he's tried, how much of a pain point it is, a number of other questions. For now, though, I'll begin to wrap this up because we want to keep things moving along. But I've got 2 more questions for you. So firstly, if you were interested in getting involved more with the decentralized science movement at this point, do you know what you would do as a next step?
So currently I'm working on like the formats integrating data onto IPFS or IPLD graphs, and I'm working with a couple of people there, and so that's what I would guess I try to continue. And also I hope to meet more people, because it's tough to do it with few people.
Yeah, definitely. And would you, at this point, I mean, you're a bit tech savvy, which not all scientists necessarily are. Obviously, researchers can span a lot of different skill sets. Do you have any particular questions, concerns, or anxieties that might stop you going deeper at this point?
So what I'm always wondering if I will reach a point where I cannot go further, because I'm really wondering why this hasn't been done before, because these problems exist since a long time, and I'm really wondering why should it work now, and why should I be doing that? Why isn't that done already? And up to now I didn't really reach that point, but I'm always kind of afraid that at some point I will discover it, and then everything was like lost. And yeah, so don't know.
And as a final question, if you could articulate anything that you really hope would be a overall benefit to science or benefit to your life, do you have any hopes for what decentralized science could deliver to you individually?
So what I really want to have is this a little function which kind of maybe is called open dataset, where I could put an identifier for a dataset into, and it will just open the dataset and I can use it. And this function should work on my computer, and work if I send it to someone else's computer, it should work there as well. It should be fast. If the data is cached on my machine, it should still work if it's somewhere else. So I just want this little function basically. And if it's possible to build that, that would be great.
And if it is, then we should build it, right? All right, thank you very much, Toby. That was very brave, and I'm also very grateful for you to step up at that kind of short notice.
Thanks.
So I hadn't spoken to Toby much beforehand. I didn't know what he was going to say, but he's given me a number of ideas for projects I could put him in touch with, or ideas that I could go and explore further. I want to give you a quick overview of a very, very brief summary of interview tips. So the number one rule is you should just always talk to users. It doesn't matter if you're an enormous company or one person with an idea. Until you've had some casual conversations as well as more in-depth ones, you often have no idea if your idea actually will have any traction. So talk to people, anyone, catch them in a queue or in the library, wherever you see them. Ask one or two questions that can start to fill out whether your idea is actually a good idea. Always stay curious. Don't assume you know what anyone's going to say. Dig into small points. And you never know what people will start to let on when you build a bit of trust. This is an extremely important tip. Always dig into current circumstances. You don't want to ask about wishes, about hopes, at least not to the very end of the interview. You should always try and dig into past specific behaviors and past specific events. So never ask, how often do you go to the gym? If you're interested in building a new fitness app, you should ask, when was the last time you went to the gym? Simple things like that can completely change the information that you get out of a particular conversation. And thirdly, do not pitch your idea. If you go in saying, hey, I've got this idea about blah, 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 I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. You've already kind of exposed your thinking. If you say, I'm building this thing, no one will want to tell you that it's a terrible idea. They'll be like, oh, yeah, sounds great. You should definitely do that. And if you ask, would you buy this if I asked you to? They'll say, oh, yeah, I'd probably pay like $20 for that. tells you absolutely nothing. It's been shown again and again. It tells you absolutely nothing about whether people will actually pay for it. There are different techniques for working out how people will engage with your project down the line. But do not let them know what you want to do. My final tip is read this book, The Mum Test. It's very short, and it will completely change how you do user interviews. It will walk you through from the very beginning through to how you can reach out to get people to interview, the email templates you can use. It's a fantastic book, and its subtitle, which you won't be able to read, is How to Talk to Customers and Learn If Your Business is a Good Idea When Everyone is Lying to You. So the idea is, how do you get to the truth when everyone wants to encourage you and say your idea is great? So yeah, well, thanks again, Toby, for doing a live interview. And now, on your pathway to understanding how to onboard users successfully into this space, step 1 was understand your users, and step 2 is building awareness and making the space more inviting. So we're going to shift gear a little bit now and think about actionable strategies that we can do to make this space feel more appealing.
I'm just waiting for my slide. I have one single slide, so we are going to move very quickly today. We're putting it up. How's everyone feeling? A little hungry? I'm a little hungry. I should have written them down, and I didn't. So basically, I've pulled up a few points that we have discovered through mistakes at LabDAO so far. I wouldn't call them necessarily mistakes, but improvements that we're trying to implement. And these are things that kind of go into onboarding, but they're also pre-onboarding as well. Just approaches that and lessons that we've found. It's coming? Okay. All right. Oh, there, yeah, okay. All right, so in the interest of being very quick, information dumps are overwhelming. Nobody remembers things if you throw them 7 paragraphs about what your project is. And that's really hard in this space because a lot of these projects are extremely complex and need a lot of context. So unfortunately, you're going to have to spend a lot of time either getting someone who's a professional writer or just working with your team to reduce the amount of information that you give people up front. Create a catchy tagline that is explanatory and informative. Another lesson, balance access to resources and use succinct explanations. So that's kind of contrary in what it's saying. You want to give people, scientists specifically always want more information. They want to learn. They're naturally curious people. They've gotten into this space because they want to discover things. So when you're talking about something new and you're writing for scientists, it feels like it makes sense to explain every single point, which is true. You should be very clear. You should explain what an NFT is. You should never assume that someone knows actually what an NFT is. But within that, you should also have a balance between, again, writing 7 paragraphs and linking resources where they can explore further. This is something I am still trying to figure out, and I think a lot of people are also trying to figure out in this space because it's a very, very hard balance to hit. Let people learn on their own timeline. This is really important in DAOs. We have a lot of people that come in and just lurk for a few months, and that's different from something like, say, an official company where you come and you onboard and you start working once you're finished your onboarding. People may start onboarding, get distracted, come back to an week. Ideally, you want them to go through all of it, but that's not naturally how it's going to happen. So design your DAO, design your space, design your DeSci project so that anyone coming into it has the ability to take a breather and return to it. And then the final little early onboarding lesson that I'm going to share is one-on-one connections are key, and we have found this, that basically all of the people in LabDAO who are extremely involved now were people who were spoken to one-on-one by someone else in the community, who encouraged them to come to something, who encouraged them to join a specific group. there are a lot of curious people in this space, and making sure that they have the ability to connect with another person who will pick up on what they're interested in is really, really important. And with that, I will not information dump on you and move on to...
Mine is, I think it kind of makes sense. I was pretty nervous about how like each of our topics is going to come together, but I think it kind of rolls together. Mine is more similar to if you guys were here when Rafa was talking about product communities to product kind of scenario. Mine is like after you've established what Isabel was talking about, the product interview, and then you started communicating what the whole community and the product is about. How do you get actually contributors? How do you get people? How DAOs do it right now, and I'm so glad that you guys are more DAO savvy. I was not sure what the taste of the audience is going to be like, so I was very timid with the slides. I'm very fond of making fugly slides, so it's just going to be a couple images, and I'm going to be talking. And keep it short so we can actually talk a little bit in groups and figure out some cool things. And so yeah, let's jump into it. So first of all, with everything, with what Isabel was also saying about like product research, you have to know your goal. And for DAOs, our communities, the vision that we have is these teal organizations, which is basically just this very nice blue color at the top, which are like self-sustaining, almost like organism type of working together communities. And they are based on this very egalitarian, which just means that everybody has an equal chance at the beginning, the equal chances to start their work, do anything in the community, and on meritocratic ideas, which is you get compensated and rewarded based on merit, so like your actions, your knowledge, and actual things. So it's kind of like a very ideal thing that we're going for here. These communities also heavily, the premise of DAOs is that they rely on shared ownership as well, which is very unique compared to a regular community that's out there. This is one of the key factors that we have, and kind of it's either like could be a poison, and it could also be like a very, very, very useful thing to have. And not to mention these communities are all over the world. You have to work throughout time zones, throughout nationalities, throughout different types of working styles, behaviors, cultures, and everything. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. We're not going to talk about that. What I'm going to say is what onboarding in DAOs looks like right now, what bigger DAOs are doing, what is like the method that's been established in the past 2 years, and it's still going on, which is my fugly little slides. This is a diagram that I made. We're going to talk about that in the beginning. Essentially, DAOs are forming into guilds, pods, squads. They break out into smaller sections, which is why we're trying to do that after this as well. Because there's this little paper that you probably can't read. It's a little blurry, but there's this research that it is established that it's only 150 people that can actually produce and some sort of effective work and sort of know each other, at least by name. There's only 50 people who can like talk to each other on a weekly basis, have like fairly regular touch-ups about work, about anything that they're doing. 15 people is a smaller scale. You can work with those people weekly, actually produce work. And 5 is the ones that you can work on a daily basis and be very, very effective together. So no matter how big the organization's growing, this is something to keep in mind. It's a well-established form of work and group psychology and everything. You have to keep this in accounting. So it could be a 5,000 people DAO. You still have to have these subgroups, which is the pink little things. The big black is the whole organization. The bigger orangey part is kind of like, let's say, the content side of the DAO that's doing more of the PR, biz dev, communications, and the little pink ones are the subgroups within that actually produce efficient work with few people in them. And what DAOs are doing right now is that we have this outer layer of users, which is very public. Usually it's a Discord server, it's your Twitter, it's everything that you touch, every other person. And then we have tiers and this very specific funnel of getting in. It's a little unique to every community, and I think regarding science communities, it's also going to be very unique with like subgroups that do different types of research and work together in different types of ways. But we do have this funnel of being just from this passerby member into a community member, and then a contributor, maybe part-time, maybe occasional, and then full-time contributor, then core team, and maybe even founding partner eventually if you go along this funding thing. But what's crazy about DAOs is that we do this fully remotely. We don't know each other personally. It's usually anonymous as well. We might know each other's faces. We definitely know the voices, and we text, but it is needing this very specific technology which we're developing, because if I don't know you, if I have no access to like your credentials to anything, it's very trustless, very anonymous, very meritocratic, and what we established before. But it requires a ton of tooling because of this like very cool nature that we developed aside from the regular communities that already work together. So here there's just a few that this person mentioned in their article, but yes, let's move on. So what we do right now is I collected all of this, and this is not even all of them, but these are all the platforms where you can post bounties, and basically people can discover and start working with you. It's kind of where you onboard. It's also, onboard is kind of a strange word in Web3, I think, but these are the platforms where you can have bounties, opportunities, job openings, anything, and they work in different ways. They also, some shape or form, they're starting to incorporate credentials with NFTs. And for example, JokeDAO is a more interesting one because it is the only one I've seen which is actually a building out to be a protocol, but it's rewarding you every week with tokens for participating. All the other ones, DAOs and everything that I've seen, they don't do that. It's very like you either work for them or no, but with JokeDAO, you show up and you get paid if you actually do something. Like it's very, very open, and I think it's a great experiment for later things, but what I bolded out is essentially it works with Discord and Twitter. Like that's the essential. If you want to do something, you post, some people even write it on their Twitter handles that they're hiring, and then that's it. And the Discord is where we have like a channel for openings, for open bounties, how you can get an NFT or POAP or tokens or USDC, and get paid. Those are like the very basic things to get started with, but all the rest is up to you and fully the nature of your community, what you need and what your goals and values are, what type of tool accompanies that. And that's what we're trying to figure out in the little breakouts in a bit. And yeah, we're getting to the breakouts. I think I kept my 7 minutes really nicely. I'm very proud. Yeah, we're going to talk about the onboarding flow and the tool discovery a little bit, because I have all of these under my belt. I'm also a tool builder, so ask me anything. And I think what we're going to do to make this the simplest is we're going to stay on this floor. I think I'll just run back to the couch, and you guys should come if you want to talk about my topic. These are the 3 topics that are going to be held. I think maybe, Isabel, you should say, like, here. Lily, is it okay if you take one of the desks and just collect there? I think we can have like 10 minutes of solid, or 15 minutes of solid conversation, and then we'll have like tiny conclusion time at the end. Good. So see you at the couch if you want to talk through the onboarding flow.
Thank you. So I'll make sure that I'll point each person to their area, right? You guys are each doing one area?
Thank you, I'm Dan. So what really matters to researchers appear to be funding, and we thought of funding as the gateway drug, forgive the pun, for bringing awareness of Web3, and that would also open the researchers to other benefits of Web3, such as DAOs or storage and so on. And another aspect was trying to attract younger researchers towards Web3, as they seem to be more open to its possibilities than elderly ones. And it seemed that Web3 as a rebranding away from crypto has only been partially successful, because there's still some reluctance towards Web3 due to the associations with crypto scams and hacks.
Brilliant, thanks. I'm very relieved as someone at Molecule to hear that funding might be the hack to make researchers listen. Feels like I made a good choice. All right, so that was researchers. Then we've got funders.
I had to choose a white T-shirt for Spaghetti Bolognese Day. So funders, I think there's still a spectrum of skepticism. So you still have to convince them of the benefits of decentralization. So I think what we would say is, Web3 allows the processes and the technical tools to decentralize funding of and knowledge in the scientific space, allowing better patient impact and unlocking financial gains and reputation. So it's kind of the financial and the reputational gains that kind of differentiate funders, I think.
Nice. We discussed the point that, in the last 10 years, I think there's been an amount of movement in terms of open access and open data that people previously didn't think possible, because a lot of the big funders said, okay, it's time. So, we'll need to move towards getting that level of credibility that the EU, Plan S, Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, that they start to see this as a meaningful and effective way to get their missions realized. We know the incentives are there, but we have to make that incentive alignment really clear. Tech transfer offices.
Briefly, tech transfer offices, these are the guys that will apply for the patent, for the researchers that have invented something cool, or they decide not to do it if they don't think that it's novel enough. We first found out that actually the range of tech transfer offices, which are entities within universities, so they own the intellectual property, it's quite heterogeneous. For some, the current system actually works, mainly in the US. MIT, Stanford, they make tons of money the way the system is set up right now, so probably not the best idea to approach these guys, but there's a lot that have sort of misaligned incentives. And for them, probably cash will be quite important, and perhaps even funding research quite early, so way pre-IP basically. So we talked about funding PhD positions, because hardly any university would say no to that. But then you basically put in this clause that any IP generated through that will in the end belong to the DAO or whoever was doing the funding basically. Another thing is sometimes researchers think they did something cool, but then the tech transfer office decides that it's not worth applying for a patent for that, and then they hand back the intellectual property to the researchers, and sometimes they're frustrated with that and they would still like to turn this into a patent, and it's quite niche-y, but it happens. So that might be another option to get a foot in the door quite early before you then can actually prove that the system works, and then maybe in the long run also create network effects and make the tech transfer offices open up to ideas like that.
That's super interesting. Yeah, clap. I love the idea of funding PhD programs. We need some money for that, so if anyone wants to donate, then let's do that. But also there are parallels with what current funders do. Things like the Howard Hughes Medical Foundation can sometimes fund particular programs or labs with stipulations about the IP. So again, it's this confluence of going upstream to the funders and the incentive drivers in the system and seeing how that will flow downstream. Amazing. Thanks very much. I think we have some action points, which is talk to researchers, and what we wanted to do as a group here was create a one-pager, perhaps, that we can give to different stakeholders in the system that explains the value of decentralized science. We have a map of the ecosystem with all the logos, but that wouldn't tell any individual why they should care. So that's something that we took away as a potential action point of the group to make compelling one-pagers. So hopefully people will be able to find me on Twitter or on Discord, reach out to people at Molecule, and we'll be able to perhaps coordinate a one-pager value proposition to help spread the message that we can share far and wide. All right.
Is this the button? Nope. Okay, this one definitely works. All right, so we talked about a lot of stuff in a very brief amount of time on the building awareness front. But in summary, a big topic was fighting information overload. So a suggestion there is, appointing a community steward whose role it is to simplify the stream of information and allow people to go down rabbit holes if they want, but keep that kind of streamlined flow of information, because often we see in these DeSci projects that it's just, here's my idea in 45 pages. It's very detailed and it's awesome and you can really dig into it, but we need as you just said, the one-pagers are very important as well. So even, that could look like having a communications squad or team or guild perhaps, having a group of people, or even just hiring a science communicator, because this information can be overwhelming, and when we're trying to reach out to people who don't have 5 hours after work to learn about all these things, we need an effective way to communicate it. And another point on that was we need to perhaps slow down a bit to do communications properly. So the natural move in Web3 is to move fast and break things, but communications is one of those things that should perhaps not be broken too aggressively. So taking an approach where things are very considered before being publicly posted can avoid confusion, which is a really big turnoff for a lot of people who are hesitant to get into the space already. Another thing that we talked about was framing tools in an accessible way. So when talking about something like Discord, instead of just throwing someone into the Discord and saying, okay, now you're part of the DAO, having a way to communicate that the Discord is not the DAO, it's a tool that the DAO uses to communicate. And I think that for scientists, that's a really logical pathway where you do some action and you use the software to complete that action, but doing the action is not the software itself. So that's another point that we had. And then, explaining in-person onboarding in a scalable way. So trying to figure out how to have one-on-one sessions in a way that actually scales with a DAO that could grow to whatever size. That's not super straightforward. We threw around some ideas, maybe having specific teams for this, et cetera. In terms of action points, I think one thing that really came of this was that we need stewards to simplify the information about your projects, all of your projects. And I think there was also discussion of sharing resources. So if someone's writing a document on how to use Discord for scientists, they should open that up and share it around in this community because it's useful for everyone. So thinking about this onboarding information as something that can be helpful for all of us. Yeah.
With the onboarding flow and more of the practical tools and everything, we touched on accountability and how bounties are being sometimes abused by people who do part-time jobs at multiple DAOs and don't really do the jobs, are not as long as they should be or not as well as they should be, and the difficulties of that. We also talked about if there's a solution for onboarding and managing contributors that matches everybody and one fits all kind of, and the conclusion was no. And we also touched on the multi-chain assets kind of problem, which a lot of the DAOs face that have multiple things on multiple chains, and all these platforms that I showed in the presentation, they are also mostly on ETH, but some of them work with other chains as well, which is great. The incentive problems that we have to fix on our own within our own communities, maybe they're just not communicated well, back to Lily's point, or maybe it's not good enough and you have to step your game up sometimes. And the last two things, that the conflict of interest, because of the level of anonymity that we have within the communities, sometimes it can let malicious actors get a hold of your community and use it for not really good things, leak some very vital information. We don't have a conclusion for this. It's just what comes with the space, but yes. So it's more due diligence when you hire actual contributors of what type of people they are. Maybe personality tests, I don't know. And the last one is we identified that there's a huge gap with the teal organizations that I talked about, which is very self-sustaining, very dreamy, egalitarian, meritocratic organizations, and how DAOs work right now, which is very management focused. There's a lot of community managers. There's a lot of people who manage these bounties and everything. And kind of the action point here is decide and get very, very clear on your community's values and goals. And going from that, you can have better incentives, better alignment with the goals and the people, even the anonymous ones. And then work towards the teal organization dream that we have, and the tooling will catch up, and some communities will be better and going towards that, and eventually that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an amazing session of the women of DeSci. I just noticed it was led by women, and
I'm glad you just noticed, because we're also just people in DeSci.
No, it's great. And a clap for the ladies, please. It was really great. Yes.
Yeah, we would like to see a better percentage of women here at the next DeSci conference. And one theme that we didn't get to talk about was we need to be better than science if we're going to truly live the values of decentralized science, because science as it stands is very non-representative across many different spectra. So if everyone can, we've emphasized the power of personal connection in terms of getting people here today. A lot of people have come because they heard it directly, personally from someone else. Hopefully everyone here can go out and reach out to at least one more person that they'd like to be a part of this space, and we will grow it in the end.
Thank you, Isabel. That was great.